Okay, it is 1 o'clock Eastern. That is the starting time of today's presentation, but I'm going to give it about a minute more just to let everybody get settled and come on board, and we'll get started right about, well, let's make it 1:02. We'll get started, okay? Okay, welcome everybody to today's presentation. Today's presentation is going to be about the EnterpriseOne Orchestrator, and we're going to discuss its uses. We're going to highlight some case studies of some clients of ours, and we're going to talk about all the advantages and why you should be leveraging it in your company. So let's go to some quick housekeeping. If you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a few icons, and one of them is Q&A. When you press it, you'll get the box to the right that opens up, and you could just type your question there. Make sure you put it to send all panelists. So today's webinar is scheduled for 50 minutes, plus we have about 10 minutes for question and answer, but we will answer all questions no matter how long it takes. All participants are currently in this listen-only mode, so you're not going to be speaking your questions, you'll just be typing them, so your microphone won't work. And all questions should be typed into the Q&A box, and like I said, we will answer them at the end of the presentation, okay? So a quick about us, because we want to get right into the topic at hand. Today's webinar is brought to you by ACBM Solutions. And that is Larry Farino, President, Founder, and JD Edwards, Practice Director. He's on the left, or if you're looking at the screen, he's on the left. And to the right, that's me. Apparently, I only take pictures in black and white. My name is Michael Saul, and I am the Director of Business Development. We are located in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. We are an Oracle Gold Partner, and we are one of only 2 companies that has an Oracle validated integration with the Orchestrator, and that's for JDE EnterpriseOne 9.1 and 9.2. So here's what we do. We have 3 lines of business. The first, over to the right, is we offer IoT solutions. These include fleet management, asset tracking, and equipment integration known as PLC. We have our own platform in order to do that, and we integrate with the orchestrator in order to achieve those results. We also do consulting. We handle implementations, upgrades. One second, apologize. Application integration, business process improvement automation, custom development, as well as custom report development. Okay. And then finally, we do training. And our training is specifically focused on the EnterpriseOne Orchestrator. We do public, or what I like to call semi-private training, which multiple companies attend, as well as private training, which we can set up a training just for your organization, and we can do it in person or virtually over the internet, as long as you have a good, solid internet connection. And we've done both, and a lot of times we've done hybrids where our instructor will show up in person and actually be doing some virtual training as well for people who are located around the globe. We, like I said, we do these training both in person and virtual over the internet. All you need is a strong connection, a strong internet connection, and you're good to go. Here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about digital transformation and its role in your company. We're going to talk about integration and application integration and how the orchestrator provides seamless, bulletproof integrations. We're going to talk about business process automations. Who's doing them now for you? How long is your life cycle in order to get these process automations designed and implemented? We're going to show you how the orchestrator can cut significantly down on that life cycle. We're going to talk about the Orchestrator Studio, give an overview of that. And then, like I said earlier, we have some use cases to go over, including creating vouchers using CSV, advanced pricing, exchange rates, inventory management, year-end processing, IoT fleet, meter readings, as well as billing and CRM integration. So, without further ado, I would like to turn the microphone over to Larry Farino. Larry has 14 plus years of experience as a J.D. Edwards functional consultant. He has run numerous projects, including implementations, integrations, built a whole bunch of orchestrations for a lot of different clients all over the world. And he is going to be your instructor for the day. Like I said, any questions, just drop them down into the Q&A box and take it away, Larry.
All right, thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn about some orchestrator stuff. We're really excited to present this to you. And as Michael indicated, we have a ton of content to get through today, probably the most we've ever done in a webinar, just because we keep having more and more use cases and more things that we want to show and talk about. So I'm going to try to get through as much of it as possible. I may talk a little fast, especially towards the end, but I want to get through everything. And as Michael said, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will answer every single one of them. And as he said, we will stay on as long as it takes in order to get through them, but we're going to do that all at the end. So, all right, so let's jump right into it. So we're going to start with digital transformation. So digital transformation is one of those nebulous words that everybody kind of knows what it means, but not really. And so what I want to do is frame it around the orchestrator and specifically talk about how the orchestrator can help improve digital transformation, right? And so digital transformation, again, at least as it relates to the orchestrator, is really anything that uses technology to improve data, and in this case specifically ERP data. And so there's three different characteristics that we like to discuss here. The first is data availability. So is the data available in a real-time nature from the actual source, or does it have to go through a bunch of different manual manipulations and transformations and take a long time to get to where it's supposed to be? The next one is the data quality, right? And when you get data directly from the data source, then you don't, again, because there's not those data manipulations, you're getting the actual data from the source, the data quality is improved. And there are a lot of tools that are available, both inside and third-party tools, inside of JDE and third-party tools that help facilitate those, right? Those two things. But where the orchestrator differentiates itself is on this third point, the data integrity. When we talk about data integrity, or more specifically, when we talk about the orchestrator works at the application level. It turns your data source into a user of JD Edwards. And by the way it does that is by enabling that data source to work at the application level. Okay, so when a user goes into a form, first they have to have security to that form, right? If they don't have security, they'll be blocked out. Same thing with the orchestrator. If they don't have security to it, they'll be blocked out. When they start filling out the information on the form, JDE will auto-complete all their fields. Same thing with the orchestrator. You have to put in the minimum amount of data, and then JD Edwards will fill out the rest. So when it comes to the data integrity, all of your referential integrity is maintained throughout the system because, again, we're working at the application level. You'll hear me say that at least a dozen times on this webinar. And for those of you that have taken my training, or hopefully one day in the future will take our orchestrator training, you'll hear me say it hundreds of times, because that is the thing that really differentiates the orchestrator from business services, from Z files, from anything else that you could use for your integration or automation projects. It's the fact that the orchestrator works just like a user at the application level, and that's what gives it its differentiating factor here. Is it allows you to work at the application level without needing to do any development or any coding. So business analysts, anyone who understands the applications in JD Edwards can build and execute these orchestrations, and that's what makes it so powerful. Whoops. So when we talk about the orchestrator, there are literally, there are countless use cases for how it can be used. I have clients that have created literally hundreds of orchestrations after our training. But I like to categorize them into three main buckets. So the first one is Internet of Things. And when we say Internet of Things or IoT, that refers to bringing in equipment and asset data into JD Edwards, okay? So these can be fixed equipment, like the PLCs and things like that Michael had mentioned in the beginning, or it could be mobile assets. It could be anything, right? Then as the orchestrator matured, it started releasing functionality that, that facilitated application integration. And we're going to take a look at that in a bit more detail and see what those pieces of functionality are, and how we can use it to integrate disparate third-party software systems. And then most recently, I'd say within the last 6 to 9 months or so, there's been some enhancements to the orchestrator that have really helped facilitate business process automation. We'll go through a couple of examples of that as well, but the idea is that you can turn or transform JD Edwards into an autonomous ERP and have JD Edwards start detecting when certain conditions exist and then automatically remediating themselves. So we're going to talk about that as well. Okay, this is the most technical slide I have in the whole deck. And for those of you that aren't interested, it's okay. I just want to take a minute because I always get some questions about the architecture and the data flow as it relates to the orchestrator. So I wanted to just give a brief explanation of how this works. So it starts with the data source. And initially, you could only push data to the orchestrator. Now you can both push and pull from the orchestrator, but it starts with the data source, and it sends the information to the AIS server, which is where the orchestrations are executed, okay? And those messages are transmitted over HTTP, just the same as like your web browser, right? When you open it up and you go on google.com, you're sending an HTTP message, and we're doing the same thing here. We're sending a REST request, and specifically the payload of that is what's called JSON, just a different language in which, different syntax in which we're sending that information back and forth, okay? Again, this is more technical than the rest of this presentation, and if it doesn't make sense, that's okay. It's just important to know that we're transmitting data back from the data source directly to the orchestrator, which in turn is forwarding the messages over to your JD Edwards web server. So everything to the right of where we have the AIS server is just our existing JD Edwards infrastructure. And again, working at the application level, that's all the AIS server is doing. It's just forwarding these messages into the applications that already exist in JD Edwards, whether they be standard or custom applications. The orchestrator can access those fields just the same, regardless. The other thing I want to say here is that the orchestrations are actually created in what's called the Orchestrator Studio. So the Orchestrator Studio is separate from the AIS server. The AIS server is where those orchestrations are executed, but the Orchestrator Studio is where they're built, where a citizen developer or business analyst or whomever can go in and define what these orchestrations are. So the advantage of this is that you only need one Orchestrator Studio. Normally it would sit in your DV environment. And then when you're ready to share it and promote it, you would promote it to a PY AIS server and then ultimately to a PD, a production AIS server, and giving everybody the ability to then call and utilize these orchestrations that you built. Okay, next slide. Okay, so very quickly, I'm not going to go through all the different methods. The main thing that I want to highlight here when we're talking about integrations with JD Edwards is that there are, you see over here, I have 4 of the more common ways I've seen integrations done, whether it be SQL, Z-Files, business services, or AIS. You know, they were all sort of getting a little bit better and better, and even business services and AIS, they still have their use cases, I guess. But the orchestrator really does check all the boxes, and it allows, again, it allows a non-developer to be able to go in and create these no-code orchestrations. Sometimes, depending on the use case and the requirements, sometimes you do need a little bit of development, and the orchestrator gives us the facility to do that. So we may leverage a developer resource to help fill the gaps where, if they may exist within the Orchestrator Studio. But I would probably say at least 90% of the orchestrations that I've written can be done without any of this coding in there, and that's really nice. So the orchestrator now gives us the ability to not only integrate our data operation type integrations, right? So our create, read, update, and delete operations, but now we can embed business logic in it and do those transformations if needed within the orchestrator as well. Okay, speaking about business process automation. So for anyone who's been to Collaborate or InFocus in the last couple of years, I'm sure you've heard about the alert, analyze, act paradigm, right? The idea is that a business analyst would log into JD Edwards and they would be alerted that something needs to happen, right? Via a watch list or something like that. Once they're alerted, they would go in and analyze it and then take some sort of an action to remediate it. Well, now with the orchestrator, if we can deterministically define what those conditions are, we can create an orchestration that will now transform this process from an alert, analyze, act to a detect, decide, do. And the detect, decide, do, what that means is that the orchestrator is now detecting that something has happened, deciding based on a predefined set of rules what corrective action needs to be taken, and then actually going ahead and executing it and doing it. So an example of this is one that's been around for a long time, a request that's been around for a long time, is to be able to automatically approve machine-generated batches, right? So anyone that has batch approval turned on in JD Edwards knows that even if you get a machine-generated or a system-generated batch, someone has to go in and approve and post it. And those can become quite voluminous. But why should that be, right? Why do you have to do that? instead of having someone go in and manually approve and post those, you could build an orchestration to detect that one of these machine batches has been generated, and then the orchestration can say, okay, yeah, I know this is a batch generated by JD Edwards. I'm going to go in and approve it and post it. And as long as this orchestration is built and put on a schedule or executed somehow with valid credentials that have the ability to approve and post that batch, you'll be able to automate that whole process. So that's a good example of how we can transform JD Edwards into an autonomous ERP, right? It doesn't mean that the orchestrator is going to take over everything and, you know, like the Terminator days, right, where machines are just going to rule the world. That's not quite what we're talking about. But for anything that we can define a set of rules and define a set of actions that need to be taken to when those rules are satisfied, then we can start automating those and freeing people up to start doing the more meaningful stuff, the more analytical work, where they have to where they have to make decisions between things based on softer requirements. So I want to take a couple minutes and talk about the different components of the orchestrator. So on the left, we have the two master components, being notifications and orchestrations. Notifications allow you to define messages that are sent to users when certain things happen. Okay, it's sort of a sister component to the orchestrator, or to the orchestrations, I should say. And these notifications, they can be defined. They can incorporate data from an orchestration or from a watch list, or just be a simple notification that gets triggered, right? Either on a scheduler or however we want to dispatch those notifications. But the nice thing about subscriptions or notifications is that they can be either assigned to people or people can subscribe to them. So if you're a manager and you want to make sure that your people are notified at the end of the month that they have to go in and approve and post all of their pending batches, you can create a notification and assign that notification to them. Then they're going to receive that notification no matter what. They can also subscribe to notifications. So think of those as the optional notifications, right? So we can build notifications, and once they're published, anyone who wants to see can go in and subscribe to it. So assigning notifications are required. Subscribing to notifications are more optional. The other master component we have there is the orchestration. The orchestration is used to define the other subcomponents that we see on the right-hand side and order them, as well as define the inputs and the outputs to the orchestration and also to each of the different subcomponents that exist there. Now on the right, for our subcomponents, the first one we have is a service request. And when the orchestrator first came out, all we had was a form request. And the way I like to describe the form request is it's just like building a test script when you're going through an upgrade or the implementation, right? So when you have a test script, you say, I want to open this form, I want to click on this button, I want to fill out this field, and then I want to go to this row exit. Whatever the steps are that you want to do when you're in an application, that's what you define in a form request. Okay? And again, that's the thing that makes the magic of this Orchestrator Studio. That's what makes everything work, is that when you're into the service request, you are you're acting at the application level. Since then, we've had several other types of service requests come out. So we have custom service requests that allow you to inject either GroovyScript or Java into your orchestrations. Those are the pieces. That's the one aspect of the whole orchestrator that's considered more of the low-code side as opposed to the no-code capability. So everything outside of this one box that has the custom there, everything else a business analyst or a power user can execute or can build on their own. Next, we have data requests, which allow us to pull data out of JD Edwards. We have messages, which allow us to, as a step in the orchestration, send out a notification, or I should say a message. So it can be an email, a work center message, things like that. They can be sent out as a step in the orchestration. We have a connector. Now, the connectors have become increasingly more prevalent in the orchestrations that I'm seeing. And there are 4 different types of connectors, and 3 of them are no-code connectors. So the first is an FTP. So you can set up an FTP connector to transfer files back and forth. And the nice thing about that is in a very recent tools release, I believe it was 923, you got the ability to transfer CSV files as part of the FTP connector and automatically read in that information, all again with no code. So you can start transferring and bringing in CSV files and processing them and sending them to service requests or other service requests, other form requests, all without any code, which is really nice. The next is a REST connector. So we're going to see in a minute a use case that uses a REST connector to get information from an external source. Again, no code is required in order to use a REST connector, although you do have the ability to inject some Groovy scripting in a REST request if you want to. But plenty of good orchestrations are written using a REST connector and without any Groovy script. So that works really well and is extremely helpful. We have a database connector, so you can connect to any external database, SQL, Oracle, DB2, Postgres, whatever it is that you need to connect to for your external data. You can do that. The thing with that is a database connector does require some Groovy scripting in order to execute. So that's the one that does require a little bit of additional code. And then finally, you can call orchestrations from a connector. So if you have a bunch of steps that you want to repeatedly call, you can create a connector, and that connector would call the other orchestration. And we're going to see an example of that in a little bit as well. After that, we have watch lists. So if there's an existing watch list out there and we want to bring some of that data into the orchestration, we can. Specifically, you can get like the number of critical or warning thresholds and things like that. You can bring that information in. I haven't seen too many people use the watch list inside of an orchestration, but you certainly can. So if you have a use case for that, we can absolutely do it. And then finally, the report. So the report gives us the ability to call batch versions and UBEs inside of JD Edwards. So before you could only call the interactive applications, now you can call batch applications as well. The next step that we have there is the cross-reference. That allows us to map external data into JD Edwards values. We have a whitelist, which is a primitive security measure primarily used for IoT integrations, where you want to define a list of IoT devices that have access to send data to JD Edwards. You can define that list of device IDs and then use the whitelist to filter out that data to make sure that, that you're getting the data that you're expecting. And then lastly, you can build rules. So any kind of conditional logic that you want to build into the orchestration and execute different service requests based on prior things that have happened in the orchestration or even external inputs, you can add those in the rules as well. And there's no limit to the number of rules or specifically the number of levels deep that you want to go down into the rules. You can build out a pretty complex decision tree in order to evaluate different conditions and call or take different actions based on things that are evaluated at runtime there. Okay. This is a timeline of the Orchestrator enhancements as they've been released by tools release, okay? This is not meant to be a comprehensive list of everything that's come out in every tools release. But what I wanted to do is highlight the things that I thought were important and the things that I thought had significant impact to our clients' businesses and would potentially justify upgrading to a newer release. So if you see yourself somewhere on the spectrum and you say, I'd really like to have CSV files, for example, be able to process those automatically. Well, you can look here and you can see that 923 is when that came in. And as you move further right, you'll see more of these features are having to do with the application integration and the business process automation, right? That's the core IoT stuff, that was all there from the beginning, and that really hasn't changed a whole lot. And it still works really well, right? So those IoT use cases are there, but they've been there since tools release 9155, And that's actually where our Oracle validated integration was. We have it both with 9.1 and 9.2, but our first one was with tools release 9.155, and it still is, the same orchestration is working without any changes today. So, so definitely you can continue to use your IoT use cases, but now you can bring in more of the application and process automation use cases as well as we progress to these newer releases. The other thing I should mention is that when the shift changed from the IoT Orchestrator to the EnterpriseOne Orchestrator, so does the licensing. So now, for those of you that might not be aware, the EnterpriseOne Orchestrator licenses are included as part of your maintenance. So as long as you're current on your JDE or your Oracle maintenance, you have access to the Orchestrator. All right, so let's get into some use cases. So the first one I want to talk about is creating vouchers. So this use case came from one of our training attendees, and they had a situation where they were getting a list of invoices every day, and they wanted to create vouchers to be able to pay them. So they were getting a CSV file, and they needed to create one voucher for each line in the CSV file. And what we did, let me just go to the next slide here. So what we did was we created a Groovy script to define the list of CSV files that would exist on an FTP server, okay? Once we had that list of files, and that's really all this first Groovy scripting did. It's like 3 lines of code here, where all we had to do is grab that list of file names, and then we passed it over to this connector service request. So I talked before about having a connector that could call in other orchestration. In this case, once we had that CSV file, we wanted to do 4 steps, which we're going to talk about what those 4 steps are in a minute. If I wanted to just iterate over 1 step, I wouldn't need to necessarily call another orchestration. But when you need to iterate over multiple steps, you can put those steps, package them into an orchestration, and then iterate over them using a connector. So this connector took that CSV file name and called this second orchestration that we have here. And this second orchestration, the first thing it did was call the FTP connector to go and retrieve the file name. So remember, in the first orchestration, all we did was define the file name and then have a connector to call a second orchestration. In the second orchestration, our first step is to use a connector to go grab that actual FTP file, okay? Once we have that FTP file, we had to do some data manipulation here. So this is where the Groovy script came in handy. We had to kind of parse out the information that we needed and return that. So we wrote a small Groovy script. This one, again, it was probably like 10 or 15 lines. So small, even when you do need that little bit of development in there, they tend to be pretty small, which makes the overall development time much, much faster. Once we had the information that we needed, we called a cross-reference. The cross-reference step mapped it from the data that was in those CSV files to the JD Edwards data that we needed. And then finally, the last step at the bottom here was a service request to actually enter the voucher, okay? So prior to this, they were doing this all manually. You had an AP clerk that went out there, found the CSV file every day, brought it in, and was typing or manually creating these vouchers. Now, the reason why this works is because they're single vendor, single line vouchers that were created. If you needed to have multiple lines or multiple vendor vouchers, there would have to either be the use of a third-party tool or some intense Groovy scripting to try to get around that. But this worked really well for them. Next one is exchange rate. So this is probably the most common orchestration that I see. In fact, during our training sessions on 3 separate occasions, before the training was done, we had attendees go and create exchange rate orchestrations to go and retrieve that data and automatically add them into JD Edwards, right? So using a bunch of different data sources. So one did it from Royal Bank of Canada, one used Fixer.io, and one used FloatRates.com. And I know others have gone and done something similar after our trainings, but just to give you an idea that before training was even done, people were able to get an orchestration of that would go out, retrieve exchange rates, and enter them in JD Edwards. So pretty powerful. So in the past, most of these customers, they would have, just like the voucher, someone would go out every day, find the exchange rates, and then go and enter them into JD Edwards. So the process was, needless to say, time-consuming and error-prone. And some of them looked at third-party tools to automate that retrieval of exchange rates, but they can be expensive, right? They're getting quotes of over $10,000 a year. So if you could, I think for the 3 training attendees, I think the longest it took them was 2.5 hours to build this orchestration. So in 2.5 hours, you're able to save 10 grand. That's pretty awesome. And every year, no less. So how does that work? It starts with a connector service request. So we build a connector to go and retrieve those exchange rates using a REST request. So before we looked at an FTP connector, now we're looking at using a REST request to get this information. Once we had that, we did, in this particular case, we built a custom service request to aggregate the data and put it into one array. You could have set up an orchestration to do one of these at a time, and then, again, like we did before in the vouchers, create another connector to iteratively call this or to repeatedly call the second orchestration, right? So you could have done this with no code. They just found it easier to put a quick Ruby script together to aggregate everything. But either way will work as kind of personal preference. But it does go to show you, of course, like everything else in JDE, there's multiple ways of accomplishing the same task, right? And you can use Ruby script for one, or you can not use it, and that will work just as well. Then once we had the exchange rates, it was just a simple service request, a form request, to go and enter that. And then this was, of course, put on a scheduler, so it runs every day at 2 a.m., I guess, to get that information loaded into JDE before the day starts. Oh, and it saves about 20 hours a month. Okay, year-end processing. This is an interesting use case. So one of our clients had about 150 reports that they needed to run at the end of the year as part of their annual close process. And it was, being honest, it was complicated, right? There was multiple reports and different dependencies, and they have different queues and different people responsible for things. And in the past, they were using the run UBE functionality in JD Edwards. So for those of you that aren't familiar, there was a command line in JD Edwards called run UBE. What they found is that after an upgrade, that no longer worked. So I think this training was in November, and they had about a month to get this all done and figure out how they were going to run all these reports in sync and with the right dependencies. And what they wound up doing was really clever. So they built this for one of the reports. Okay, they built the service request, the report service request that would execute the batch job. Then they took that, exported it out, and you know, when you build an orchestration or a component in an orchestration, it's actually just building an XML file. Not that you ever really need to know that, but in this case, it was very useful because this one service request built an XML file. They exported that XML file, and then they wrote a little script outside of JD Edwards to go in and replicate the other 149 report service requests that they needed. Then they just mass imported everything back in. And let me get to the next slide here because I'm already talking about this stuff. So they imported everything back in and had it all in the orchestration. Now, an issue that they ran into, which was very interesting, is that the orchestration, when you kick it off, it does log into JD Edwards, and there's a life of that login. And after whatever the timing is set up on your AIS server, it will log you back out. And when they're running 150 reports, there was certainly that opportunity to be logged out. And so they would be able to run a few, and they were getting kicked out. And so what they wound up doing was there's a setting on the report service request that will allow you to fire. It's called fire and forget. So it allows you to fire off that request and then just keep adding, going on to the next step. And if they don't have to wait for the first one to finish, then they would be able to get through all 150 of them, right? Now, the way that worked is because they're word dependencies and they need to go in a certain order, they submitted them all to a single threaded queue. So you can choose the queue when you submit a report request. You can choose which queue it goes to. So they submitted it all to a single threaded queue, and boom, just like that, their year-end processing issue was completely solved. Very, very clever use of the inner workings of the orchestrator to replicate all this and get that working. Okay, our next use case is updating meter readings. So we had a client that had a bunch of equipment in multiple locations, and every day they needed to record the number of hours that that equipment had been running. And so every day, someone would go around, grab the number of hours from each piece of equipment, write it down on a piece of paper, then hand it to somebody else. That person would type all the hours into Excel, then they would email it to a third person, and that person would then go and manually enter it into JD Edwards. So I don't have to tell you that it took quite a while when you go across all locations, and not only did it take quite a while, that there were often issues trying to read other people's handwriting or mistyping something. There was all sorts of room for error there. So we built an orchestration for them, right? They were using SCADA already. So we grabbed that SCADA data, or actually we had SCADA post the data to JD Edwards. So the orchestrator was sitting there, and they actually handled pushing the data to JD Edwards. We certainly could have built a connector to go and pull it from SCADA. That would have worked fine. But in this case, we pushed it over there. There was a cross-reference to map the SCADA ID to the JD Edwards equipment number. And then based on the information that was passed when they called the orchestration, the new meter readings were updated in JD Edwards. And of course, finally, the information was returned back to SCADA so that I knew that it was updated in JD Edwards. So this, the big reveal here, saved them over 5,000 hours a year. And again, it's not hard to imagine when you talk about, I believe it had 13 different locations, and I think they said it took about an hour, it took 1 to 2 hours every day in every location to do that manual process. And now all of a sudden, the equipment's just sending the data directly into JD Edwards. Huge, huge savings here. Okay, this one is close to my heart. So advanced pricing. For those of you that use advanced pricing, you know that there is no easy way to mass update advanced pricing in JD Edwards. There's no Z file. There's no easy way unless you create a customization or some sort of SQL, right? So I've actually I have a lot of customers that have this problem, and what we did, hold on here. So in this, I mean, I do have a lot of customers that are using this. In this one that I'm referencing, they had a very manual process where users would submit a huge Excel file with a bunch of changes on it, and someone would have to go and write a SQL or manually update this, right? And it was, again, not the best way of doing this, error-prone manual, all that kind of stuff. Or if it was automated, you're updating your JD production database with SQL statements, and that's never good either. And the response time of getting these changes turned around tended to be quite a while, up to 6 weeks, right? So that's a long time to wait to get your pricing updated. So we built this orchestration, and the way this orchestration worked, it's a little different. So normally, when you have an orchestration and a service request, you just go in and give it the steps that you want to execute or that you want to do on the application. In the case of advanced pricing, there's no QBE row on that update screen, right? If you know the one I'm talking about, that second screen, once you go into it, there's no way for you to filter it down to just one record. So what we had to do was create a custom Groovy script to figure out which row needed to be updated. So if you don't have a QBE row, you have to tell the orchestrator which row number you want to update. That's the way that those updates are done. So we built a service request to go in and find all of the matching information. So we're basically returning the grid from that second form. returns all that data into a Groovy script, and then the Groovy script says, okay, I have all this information, which is the correct row that I want to actually update. Then once it figures out that row number, then it becomes much more straightforward. There's a rule to check to make sure that there is a row to actually get updated. And then inside the rule, the first step is to go ahead and update the row based on the row number that was calculated from the Groovy script. And then the last piece is to return the data. Now, in the past, both at Collaborate and on the previous webinar that we did, we gave this advanced pricing orchestration away for free and to all attendees that wanted it. And for those of you that are interested, I'm sure Michael will make an announcement at the end. We're happy to provide this as well. It's a really useful orchestration. So definitely reach out if you're interested in getting that. Again, the response time cut from 4 to 6 weeks to 2 days. Pretty incredible. All right, so those are our orchestration use cases. I want to get into some bigger IoT type projects now, okay? So the first one is inventory management. Everyone who's tracking inventory knows how long and tedious and error prone doing cycle counts or full inventory are, right? It takes a long time. A lot of people use barcoding, that's better, but you still have to have somebody out there and going and scanning and measuring and counting and all that stuff. It just takes a long time. So what we did is we use a smart scale. So a smart scale is continuously reading the weight of the inventory and sending that data to the orchestrator. The orchestrator receives that, looks up the associated record in the item master. It evaluates if we need to order more inventory, or potentially we could trigger it, instead of just creating a new PO, we could also do a stock transfer. Both are applicable, and again, we can define different rules for that. It can be as flexible as we need it to be. But then once that's done, we can, the normal JDE process takes over, right? If we look over here on the right, once we create the purchase order, the rest of it just goes through JD Edwards. So we would create the purchase order, and then we'd probably have still a manager approve it, right? We probably don't want the scale just ordering and approving and doing its own POs all the way, but it would be nice if it could, I mean, certainly we could do that, but I think it would be really nice to just be able to create the POs or the stock transfer and then let somebody approve it afterwards. Okay, fleet management. This is the use case which we have the Oracle validated integration for. So we started getting involved with the orchestrator by integrating mobile assets into JD Edwards. I myself, I have a device on my truck, and my truck is a user of JD Edwards. So what does that mean? My truck, as I drive around, it enters its own meter readings. It generates its own work orders. It updates its own location. So I send the GPS coordinates, and I have a Google map and a Cafe One screen in JD, so I know where it is. Hopefully I know where it is since it's my truck. It also generates condition-based alerts. So based on engine temperatures and pressures and things like that, it can generate condition-based alerts or condition-based work orders. And my truck even generates its own invoices. So if I have a piece of equipment that I want to get accurate billing for, or think about job costs, you want to allocate time from an equipment time entry, you can use an IoT device to feed that information into JDE. And instead of estimating what it is, you can actually have the piece of equipment, or in this case, my truck, create the invoice or the equipment time entry or anything on its own. So pretty useful stuff. And I think I just kind of read through most of this stuff already. You know, like I said, I have a device on my truck. We have different devices, one for over-the-road vehicles and a different one for heavy construction equipment. We also have GPS tracking beacons, just if you need to just know the GPS location. We have those as well, but it basically it takes all that information, sends it over to the orchestrator. The orchestrator looks up the equipment record, and then evaluates what needs to be done. And then once that's done, it passes the data over to the appropriate JD Edwards application. And again, down here, you see this is where we have our Oracle validated integration for. Okay, I believe this is my last use case, so just about on time. So a lot of people use third-party CRM systems, right? Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, Sugar CRM, there's a whole host of them, right? And a lot of effort is built into building those integrations and making sure the data is synced between JD AdWords and whatever the source system is for that billing information. So I had 2 customers that have done this actually so far, and taking a look at the actual process flow, they were slightly different use cases, but in this one, we had a customer that would go in and order a new product or service. They would post that from the CRM system to the orchestrator. The orchestrator would then receive that information and then trigger a new sales order. And then again, at the end, the normal JDE process would take over once the sales order was created. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael, and he'll tell you how you can sign up for some of our trainings and learn about how to build all these cool orchestrations and hopefully even more that we haven't thought of yet, as well as give you some other information about that advanced pricing orchestration. So Michael, let me go ahead, take it away. Michael, are you there?
I'm
Might be
here.
on mute.
Yeah, no, I was double muted there for a second. So hopefully everything's okay now and everybody can hear me. So if you are interested in learning how to build your own orchestrations, like Larry said, some of what you've seen with the case studies, and Larry's always looking into the future, like what else can be done. And I mean, I guess there's a limit some way to what can be done, but we haven't found it yet because our clients continue to come up with new ideas and continue to put together these orchestrations that really just shave off significant amounts of time, effort, and stress, right? And stress is really the combination of time spent and the effort spent, right? So they really can clean up a lot of that stress. They don't have to worry about getting bogged down into a huge development life cycle. The developers have a ton to do as it is, and even more on their plate, and what's going to happen if it goes to the bottom of the list, and when is it going to get done. And so by training your business analysts to do this with low code, really takes a huge burden, heavy burden off of the development team. And it also allows you to free yourself up of outside legacy software. A lot of times the orchestrations will replace them, as well as giving more fluid workflow. Something needs to get done, the business analyst can handle it themselves. So it's really quite powerful. So if you would like more information on our workshops, our upcoming workshops, you could contact me at msol@acbmsolutions.com. That's my email, or you could always just give me a call, 848-232-8456. I am in the Eastern time zone, but you can call me anytime. If I don't pick up, I'm sleeping. So don't worry about not just calling me through business hours or anything. This is my personal phone, so you could get me there and just leave a message if I don't pick up, and I'll get back to you the next business day. So we have a couple of upcoming training workshops. We have an in-person workshop in Summit, New Jersey on August 13th and 14th, and it's over 2 days. Each day is about 7 hours worth of the training as well as questions. And the format that we do for our orchestrator training is half of the time we're giving a lecture, and the second half is you're actually doing the labs based on what you've learned in the previous half, right? So we'd split them up usually each session into about 30 minutes of lecture, 30 minutes of actually doing it. So you get to feel how they're actually done. It's not just a purely academic workshop. You actually build what you're being taught. And our instructor is right there looking over your shoulder in order to remediate any issues, to correct your problems that you're having immediately. So you don't have to worry about doing something and then coming back a few days later, and by that time the information is half gone, right? So by doing it, you reinforce what it takes to do. And you also get a full color, 100+ page, full color labs manual that you can reference throughout the rest of your career, as long as you're using the Orchestrator, right? So you take notes in it, and as it's going along and as you're learning everything, you get to just reference that if you ever have something that comes up, okay? So the in-person training is done over 2 full days. The virtual training, which we have one coming up next month, July 22nd to 25th, and then we have one again in September, the 16th to the 19th, those are 4 half days. So the in-person training is great because it gets done in 2 full days, and then you're done and you're off to the races. But one of the things that a lot of our clients asked us for is, we don't want to be out of the office for 2 full days, and we don't want to commit a whole day each day to training. So can you break it up? So what we did instead is we broke it up into 4 half days. They run from 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m. Eastern time. Again, usually the classes they're not going to be 4 hours long, but our instructor always likes to hang around at least 30 to 45 minutes after and make sure all questions are answered, or, hey, can you go over this again? And they're happy to do that. Okay, so with July 22nd to 25th, the thing about the virtual training, the in-person training, we can have 12 attendees at. But the virtual training, due to bandwidth paranoia, I like to call it, right? It's not really a limitation, but we're paranoid that the bandwidth is not going to be able to hold more, and the last thing we want to do is give a poor experience. So our software limitation that we have imposed on it, we only accept 9 people at each virtual training. And for July, we already have 3 people signed up. So there are 6 spots available. So if you would like to sign up, just give me a call or give me an email. I will discuss pricing with you. Also, if you feel that, hey, you know what, this sounds great, the semi-private / public training, whatever you want to call it, but we want something just for our company. And a lot of, we would have to say, and Larry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of people who inquire wind up going with a private training. So, like I said, either our instructor will come out to you and we'll teach you at your location of your choosing, or if you want, we could do that virtual as well. So once again, contact me. I'll be happy to jump on the phone with you for 10 minutes and discuss everything, discuss the options, and let you make an informed, educated decision on how you want to proceed. Okay? So that's what we have coming up with the public. And we also, like I said, private. By the way, the schedule for private is as available, as something that we both decide, a mutual, hey, this date works. Okay. All right. Also, are you coming to InFocus out in Denver, Colorado, August 20th to 22nd? We will be at booth number 103. It's at the Sheraton downtown Denver in Denver, Colorado. It is the premier J.D. Edwards trade show, whatever you want to, if you want to call it that, or at least it's a great place to meet up. We'll be happy to meet you, talk to you about your Orchestrator or other J.D. Edwards needs. So finally, connect with us. We're going to I'm probably going to be reaching out to the attendees today on LinkedIn. So if you see my name and this wonderful, beautiful face, I'm the one in black and white, like I said, although I think I have a color picture on LinkedIn, I'll look familiar and you can accept my friend request, or you can be proactive and reach out to me and I will gladly accept yours, okay? Larry's the same way. He's very friendly and courteous, so he will accept your friend request also on LinkedIn. And you could contact either of us at our emails below, and we're going to leave them up while we go over the Q&A, or you could give us a call, and we'll be happy to speak with you on the phone. So if you have questions, let's see them, and we're going to already got a couple coming in The first one is SFTP supported in the connector?
Yeah, so if you're building an FTP connector, there's a little toggle switch there that as long as, if you have that set, it will support SFTP, and you just have to make sure you choose the right port. So that will, yes, that will absolutely work.
Hello, I have an orchestration to be able to add cash receipts adjustments write-offs. We have batch header turned on and finding it difficult to be able to add multiple adjustments to the same batch number. Have you run into this, or are there enhancements coming to handle multiple transactions with a service request?
You can handle that. So a couple of things. There's two ways of handling, well, maybe three ways of handling it, right? So one is you could write a Groovy script to get everything in the right way that you need up front. But also you can, you create one orchestration for the initial creation, then you can create additional ones to, or an additional one to update it, and then you call the updates after the first one. So both of those will work. I think you could also probably use that orchestrator service request, or sorry, you could combine it all into one and use a rule to determine whether it exists or not, and then use a connector to conditionally call the add or the update. So yes, you can definitely get around.
Okay. Scheduled to upgrade to 9.2 in September. Would the training make sense on the orchestrator now, or should we wait until after our upgrade?
Okay, so I get that question a fair amount. I mean, a lot of people are upgrading or in the process of going to 9.2, and that's a great time at looking at the orchestrator and seeing what it can do. I'll say I've had people do both. So I had some people that say, look, we're just too busy with the orchestrator, or sorry, with the JDE upgrade, that we just don't have time to get into the orchestrator right now, and that's totally fine. I've had several other ones that have come and said, you know, we're doing this upgrade, we're a couple months out, and we want to be able to know what gaps and requirements that currently exist we're going to be able to fill with the orchestrator. And so they do that, not necessarily to start building them, but to have a better understanding of what they can do with the orchestrator and how it's going to fill the gap in requirements between what they have and what they need. So I've seen people do both. I've done training for both, and even in the cases where people are not live on a new version, they haven't done the upgrade yet. A lot of times, what they'll do is they'll still build the orchestrations in DV and or PY because those usually get upgraded first, especially in the case of just a tools upgrade. Right? Those will get upgraded first so they can build them there and stage them and test them. And then when they go live, they're all ready to promote them. So I've seen both.
Okay. Keep the questions coming. If you have any, we'll get to them. Next one is, what are the limitations for 9.2.2.1.5 versus 9.2.3 version of tools released for Orchestrator?
Okay. I'm going to have to read that one back to me again. I'm going to go cheat at my, just gonna roll back here and find my little timeline so I can compare the different versions. I think it's right. Whoops, too far. Okay, so can you tell me that again? What were the versions?
What are limitations for 9.2.2.1.5 versus 9.2.3 version of the tools release for Orchestrator?
Okay, so you're looking at really the, with 9.2.3 versus the version that you currently have, you'll be able to get batch jobs, FTP connector, process recorder, assign notifications, as well as CSV files, orchestrator monitor, and calling orchestrations from events. So that ability to call orchestrations from events came out in 9.2.3. Also, I'll point out in 9.2.3.3, this I think is probably the most revolutionary enhancement that's come to the orchestrator. There's the ability to call orchestrations from a form extension in JDE. So now, for those of you that haven't seen, there's form personalization and form extension. So with form personalization, you can go in and change the names. Basically, you get rid of vocabulary overrides. You can go in and change the names of everything that's on the screen. With form extensions, you can add new fields, and you can add even new buttons, and you can link those fields and buttons, or existing fields and buttons too, for that matter. You can link them to orchestration. So users, if you, like think about the address book, right? If you want to validate an address and standardize it, I've seen this done before. Put a little button on your address book, they click it, or you build it in as part of your save, so it gets triggered when you save the record, and we'll go out and call an orchestration that validates the against the USPS, right, or something like that. So you can, with the form extensions, you get the ability to start calling them there as well. So I know they only asked about up to 923, but I also want to include 9233 because there's some really cool functionality that's come out in that release. So I'd urge you to go there.
Is the process recorder stable, and does it replace the orchestrator?
The process recorder is very stable. We don't have many issues with it. The only thing I will say is that it's helpful to know how to build the service requests as well. When you use the process recorder, there are some limitations. So you can't do text substitution with the process recorder. And it defaults in all the values that you use when you're recording the process. So it only creates a service request. It doesn't actually create the orchestration or hook it up and map the input. So there's still work that needs to be done. I think it's a great shortcut. It gets you a majority of the way there, but there's still some work that needs to be done after you use it. So it's stable, but it's important to know how to build them from scratch for maintenance purposes as well.
How do my users call up orchestrations?
Users call up orchestrations. So there's a number of different ways. It depends on the use case, I guess. So in the IoT use cases, of course, your IoT device calls it, or for application integrations, those calls would be initiated by either the other application or the orchestrator. If you want users to call these things, you'd have to use the form extensions that I just talked about. That's a great way of having users be able to trigger an orchestration and feed fields or data in the fields in JD Edwards as inputs to the orchestration. So I go with that. There's also an orchestrator client. That's really more for testing. I mean, certainly you could let a user call an orchestration from that, but I would probably stick with the form extensions as the best way for users to interact with the orchestrator.
Do I need an AIS server for each environment?
I guess you don't have to have an AIS server for each environment, but you need it for each environment that you want to call orchestrations from, right? So you only need, to get back to the infrastructure, you only need one ADF server to run the Orchestrator Studio. But in order to execute the orchestrations, you would need an AIS server in each one. And sometimes people ask me about having load balancing and setting multiple AIS servers up. I know that wasn't quite the case here, but it triggered the question in my mind since I've heard it in the past. And when you think about the AIS server, all it's really doing is forwarding messages over to the JD Edwards web server, right? It's not actually doing heavy lifting. So you don't need it from a load balancing perspective, but I've seen people put it in from a redundancy perspective. Because if you have mission critical orchestrations running in production, if your AIS server goes down, that would be bad for production processing, right? So I've seen people set up 2 AIS servers in order to handle the redundancy.
How do I debug orchestrator errors?
Boy, that's another tough question. So when you build orchestrations, everything is stored, since they're executing on the AIS server, the errors or warnings or everything is handled on or it's logged in the AIS logs. But other than that, part of it is just experience and getting familiar with it. There are really, I'd say, 3 types of errors that you encounter. One are the infrastructure type errors, like if the AIS server is down. Have you ever been to a website and it gives you like a 404 not found or one of those kind of errors? You might get that when you try to call an orchestration as well if the AIS server is down. Sometimes you'll get navigation type errors, right? Like if you try to update a record, like take my address book example before, if you try to update an address book record and that address book record doesn't exist, you'll get a navigation error. Those are a little bit tougher. They're a little bit more cryptic to read, but the majority of errors that you would get are J.D. Edwards application errors. And those, fortunately, since again, we're working at the application level, right? Like I started, like we said in the beginning, because we're working at the application level, whatever error message a user would get on the screen trying to execute the process, we get that same error message on the orchestrator side. So if we're trying to add an address book record with an invalid search type, we're going to get an error message that says that search type doesn't exist in the UDC table, and it'll say UDC table 01ST and all that, and tell you exactly why it failed. So it depends on the type of error. Those are really the three main classifications, and again, the JDE application errors are the most common, and you get the same error messages that you would as if you were on the JDE screen. Okay?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Any more questions?
Okay.
I'm just making sure I'm getting them all. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, okay. Here's one. I don't know if you're going to be able to do this. Can you show step-by-step how to clone a record from existing record, use few fields and create a new record with new ID? So passing input parameter from an existing record to create new record. Then how to attach it to form extension or a button on the form of existing record.
Yeah, so that would be, I mean, we could set up a separate demo or something to go over and discuss that in more detail, but theoretically what you do is you'd have a service request that would go in and find a record to copy it, and then you would include that copy function as a step in the service request, right? And then you'd be able to copy that record, and you create a separate service request that would go in and update it based on the returning whatever record was created from the first service request step, the copy service request step. So you can absolutely do that. And then, you know, hooking that up to a button, that's just another example of the form extensions, right? You can grab a button, put it on a form with a form extension, and call the orchestration from there. And again, because those form extensions are user-defined objects, you do not need a developer to do it. Any user that has security or access to it can go and create a button on a form, and it can be on their form, or you could publish it out to other people, and then you can use that to call orchestration. So again, all of that's with no code.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's it. Let me just double check. Yep, that's it. Thank you everybody for coming. If you have any questions that I missed, which I don't know how, but maybe I missed something, or you have things that come up after you've had time to digest today's webinar, just write me at mstall@acbmsolutions.com, and I will be happy to get it answered for you and respond.
Okay, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.